G'day guys, ZiggyD here, and in this video I want to have a rather long and in-depth discussion on immunities and their place in Path of Exile. This is an important topic to me and to Path of Exile, so I want to give it the time that it deserves. Please excuse if my voice is a little bit rough in this video. I've been off sick lately, but I've been really wanting to talk about this, so I'm going to sit down and do it now. If you guys haven't been following too closely, Grinding Gear Games has been adding more and more immunities to Path of Exile over the last several patches. One of the major examples of this here is the endgame map Guardians. The Phoenix Guardian is immune to Ignite, the Hydra immune to Poison, the Minotaur is immune to Bleed and Stun, and the Chimera is Bleed and Poison immune. Additionally, in the most recent patch, the Shaper was also made immune to Taunt. Now, immunities are not an inherently bad thing, and sometimes they can even add a nice extra challenge or promote gameplay diversity. For example, the other day I was playing the new Shadow Warrior, a loot and shoot similar to Borderlands. And in that game, you'll come across elites that are enchanted with an element that they'll be immune to. Now on the flip side, they'll be weak to an opposing element. And this works fine in that game. You can have 8 different weapons equipped, and you can enchant them all with different elements to take on different enemies. The result of this is that you end up swapping your weapons around a lot more, and you're rewarded with a more diverse gameplay experience and bonus damage for doing so. So it works pretty well. Now, on the flip side, let's contrast immunities in Path of Exile, and you'll be able to see the problems they can present. In Path of Exile, you specialize hard. To make a good endgame build, you pick a mechanic and focus on it, scale it as much as possible and reap the rewards. Builds are also fairly locked in Path of Exile. Although respecs are possible, they are mainly intended for small corrections in your build, and with the game's socket system, skill swaps are not always feasible. So now you're playing a build that's dedicated to the Ignite mechanic, and you've come up against the Guardian of the Phoenix, who is immune to Ignites. Now you may be able to brute force push your way through the fight with raw damage without the ignites that you focused your build on, but only if your damage is really good. To this effect, Mathel recently published a video of his Ignite Fireball build where he showed that due to his insane base damage, he was still able to kill the Phoenix.
But it's still quite an annoying fight, and of course Ignite Immune is the bane of our existence on this character. So you could swap into double consumings. I tried it once or twice and it didn't feel significantly better. I hardly noticed poison doing anything, so yeah, don't know if that's really worth it. Because if you're going to use 2 consumings, you're going to have to recolor your chest since you'll be running Fire Pen still, and that's a complete waste. So you'd technically be attacking him on a 5-link. You've got to recolor to have a void manipulation instead, so that you're actually doing something with your 6th link and scaling your poison and your chaos, double dipping that way. Manageable fight, not very enjoyable. Kind of wanted to skip through it a bit.
Now let's take a look at another example. My personal Viper Striker. This is what you're seeing in the background here. This is a build using a skill, Viper Strike, that is entirely poison based, and the build is focused heavily on that poison mechanic. Through determination and persistence, I've managed to kill every boss up till tier 16 maps. I've even fought and killed the Minotaur Guardian in an epic intense fight that was extremely enjoyable. This build has actually been one of the most challenging and engaging experiences I've ever had in Path of Exile. Now, I didn't expect to get this far, but I plan to keep going with this build until I encountered something that I couldn't defeat. Now I find myself presented with not 1, but 2 endgame Guardian bosses that are immune to poison. So I've found that thing that I can't defeat. Now, unlike Mathel's Fireball Ignite Inquisitor, this Viper Striker is not what people would call a strong meta-defining build, and that's putting it gently. While Mathel was able to push through the Ignite Immune Phoenix with extremely high base damage, I am not going to be able to do that for 2 Guardians on my Viper Striker. It's simply not feasible without majorly respecking my build until it's unrecognizable. It's incredibly disheartening to be stopped on my climb through the core endgame content of the game by an immunity mechanic. It feels like the game is cheating. I've made it this far, I've killed every single boss, and the thing that stops me is an immunity. So for both Mathel, who is able to overcome a boss immunity, and myself, who will not be able to do so, the immunity is a very unfun mechanic. I'm curious, who is the mechanic supposed to be fun for? Now, besides the anti-fun nature of the immunity mechanics on these core endgame bosses, my example raises another point I think you might find interesting. And that point is, who immunities actually punish? Immunities do not punish the really strong meta builds in Path of Exile. Really strong builds like Mathel's Fireball or Blade Vortex Pathfinders, they're strong enough to overcome the immunity with brute force. The builds that are truly punished are the non-meta, not super strong builds. I'm curious if this is the intention behind the immunity mechanic. Talk about kicking a man when he's down. I'm playing a name-lock evasion live Viper Striker, and now you kick me in the nuts with 50% of the core endgame Guardians being immune to 80% of my damage? One of the arguments I've heard in favour of immunities is that they promote build diversity as people roll different builds to deal with the different bosses. Now, besides the fact that such a time investment is out of reach of most players, I think my examples here directly contradict this point. Only a few lucky builds that completely dodge the immunities, or a few builds that are strong enough to overcome the immunities with brute force, dominate the endgame. Again, the ones that are most punished are the more niche builds, your Viper Strikers, your Freeze Ice Spearers, etc. Another point I'd like to bring up here is that these immunities are presenting themselves in the core endgame, the Atlas bosses. This isn't a piece of side content like at Ziri. This is the main big baddies of the game. The things you point to as the major goal for the entire endgame map system in Path of Exile. Welcome new player to Path of Exile, the game that has the most build diversity you've ever seen in an action RPG. Ah yes, I see you're interested in the Atlas, the primary endgame. Quite beautiful, ain't she? 16 tiers of maps, all leading to 4 Guardians. Defeat each of them, and you'll unlock the Shaper. Oh, you're wanting to use a Poison Club card? Sorry, we don't accept those. Ignite? Well, good luck with Phoenix. Freeze! Freeze! Dear God, man, we're not a charity! Look, come with me to the Blade Vortex financing department, and we'll get you on the road to Shaper in no time. Just sign here above the meta line. As thematic as these immunities are on the Guardians, I don't think such restrictions suit the core endgame of Path of Exile. It feels so out of place and against the entire philosophy of diversity Path of Exile has always offered. I would like to note that I'm okay with boss immunities in side endgames. Way back when Ziri came out, the idea of multiple side endgame bosses like her was thrown around with the idea that some builds would be able to do one and not do the others. I think that's fine. Specialized characters suited to specialized content. Ignite builds are no good for Ziri, but maybe another side endgame boss comes along who's immune to poison but susceptible to ignites. Cool. But immunities to core build mechanics do not belong in the core endgame, because every build should be able to aspire to do them. And they should only be stopped because they get killed, or because they're not well constructed enough to deal with the general difficulty of the fights, not because they don't have the right coloured key for the gatekeeper. Now, I've done plenty of complaining about immunities in this video, but I'd also like to offer some alternatives that I think are better suited to Path of Exile. I'm not just here to have a whine. I think it's important to not just remove immunities and call it a day. Each enemy should not be the same difficulty for each build. It's good that some fights will be harder than others on particular builds. That's what makes specialization interesting in this game. Also, I really like the thematic idea of giving the Guardians resiliencies to certain things. One of the solutions to immunities I see presented all the time is just resistances. For example, giving the Chimera extra poison or chaos resist instead of an immunity. Sure, giving the Chimera 50% poison resist could work, but it's only a marginal improvement over immunities, and it's not a very interesting mechanic. I, on the other hand, propose a combination of scaling resiliencies for some mechanics, and then skill-based solutions for others. Let's go into more detail on the idea of scaling resiliency by looking at Diablo 3. I know, stop hissing and making a cross with your fingers at me. D3 did something pretty right when it comes to bosses and crowd control effects like freeze. The way it works in D3 is that for every second a boss is frozen, they get a stacking buff that reduces freeze effectiveness on them. So you can freeze any boss in Diablo 3, even the final boss Malthael. However, your next freeze will be shorter, and then even shorter, and then eventually they'll become basically immune to freeze. And then over time this buff decays, and the boss starts becoming susceptible to freezes once again. This is a brilliant idea that promotes the use of different mechanics, and doesn't overly punish builds that want to use a mechanic like freeze. For comparison, how well has Path of Exile dealt with the problem of freeze? Well, let's take a look at it. Well, any major boss is completely immune to it, and your ice skills are nothing more than blue-coloured damage. It could be done way better. On this note, the taunt immunity that was patched onto the Shaper should be treated in a similar fashion. Giving him immunity to taunt hurts builds that use taunts in interesting ways, like champions. Shaper should be able to be taunted, but with its duration getting shorter and shorter the more he is taunted in succession. Scaling resiliency such as Diablo 3 uses adapted to Path of Exile could allow things like taunt, stun, and freeze to be used in all content but remain balanced. Now let's talk about skill-based solutions. These are for primary damage mechanics like bleed, poison, and ignite. Instead of giving the Hydra poison immunity, how about when it's poisoned, it can use a skill that purges all current poison stacks and fires a glob of poison at the player. Instead of giving the Phoenix ignite immunity, how about he can be ignited, and when he's ignited, he gains bonus damage to his attacks. Instead of making the Chimera bleed immune, how about while he is bleeding, he lays down a pool of blood that degens the player. These are all thematic solutions that allow these builds to fight these bosses, but gives them extra challenges to contend with. Rather than the disheartening and anti-fun realization that I have had on my Viper Striker, that it simply cannot kill Hydra or Chimera because of immunities, instead I would be excited and scared to fight them because I would have to contend with these additional challenges. Skill-based solutions are more interesting, more thematic, and more Path of Exile. Immunities can be used in Path of Exile sparingly, but only in side content in my opinion. And if ZiggyD wants to do better, and I'm sure they do, they can completely replace immunities with other far more interesting and less punitive mechanics. I really hope ZiggyD thinks hard on their current immunity balance solutions, because while they aren't killing the game, they are really hurting it, without giving much back in return. I'm keen to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. That's it for now, I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.